The soft glow of my desk lamp illuminated the cluttered chaos that had become my workspace. Papers were strewn everywhere, half-finished articles and notes scribbled in haste, littering the surface. It was a familiar scene for me, but tonight, something felt different. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my tired limbs, when a sudden ping from my phone broke the silence. I glanced at the screen and my heart raced as I saw an anonymous message pop up. "The shadows of Cedar Hill hold the truth." My curiosity piqued. I quickly grabbed my laptop and began to type. Cedar Hill. I had heard whispers about that small town, a place marred by tragedy, by a cult led by the enigmatic Reverend David Blake in the 90s. I had always been drawn to stories like this, but this was different. There was a personal urgency in this message, an unshakable feeling that I needed to dig deeper. As I began my research, the screen filled with grainy photographs of what appeared to be rituals. People clad in white robes gathered around a bonfire, faces obscured by shadows, hands raised in fervor. I felt a chill run down my spine. What had happened in Cedar Hill? The more I learned, the more questions I had. The soft glow of my desk lamp illuminated the cluttered chaos that had become my workspace. Papers were strewn everywhere, half-finished articles and notes scribbled in haste littering the surface. It was a familiar scene for me, but tonight, something felt different. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my tired limbs, when a sudden ping from my phone broke the silence. I glanced at the screen and my heart raced as I saw an anonymous message pop up. "The shadows of Cedar Hill hold the truth." My curiosity piqued. I quickly grabbed my laptop and began to type. Cedar Hill. I had heard whispers about that small town. A place marred by tragedy, by a cult led by the enigmatic Reverend David Blake in the 90s. I had always been drawn to stories like this, but this was different. There was a personal urgency in this message, an unshakable feeling that I needed to dig deeper. As I began my research, the screen filled with grainy photographs of what appeared to be rituals. People clad in white robes, gathered around a bonfire, faces obscured by shadows, hands raised in fervor. I felt a chill run down my spine. What had happened in Cedar Hill? The more I learned, the more questions I had. I jotted down notes, piecing together a timeline of events that seemed almost too surreal to be true. "Laura, you're not seriously considering this, are you?" My colleague James leaned against the doorframe of my office, arms crossed. His expression was a mix of concern and disbelief. "Why not? There's something there, James. People went missing, and there are still unanswered questions," I replied, my voice steady but laced with excitement. "Unanswered questions, sure. But this isn't just a story, it's dangerous. Cedar Hill has a history. You remember the news reports? The disappearances? The bodies?" He stepped into the room, lowering his voice as if the walls might have ears. "People in that town don't like outsiders poking around." "Exactly. That's why I need to go. I can't let fear hold me back." I pushed back in my chair, feeling the weight of his skepticism. "This could be a groundbreaking piece, James. Imagine uncovering the truth about a cult that's haunted a town for decades." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just be careful, all right? You're not invincible." I waved him off, my determination unwavering. I know what I'm doing. Yet, as he walked away, I couldn't shake the gnawing sensation that maybe he was right. But this was my chance to uncover something important, something that could bring closure to those affected by the cult. The next morning, I packed my bags, filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Cedar Hill was a mere 3 hours away, but it felt like a journey into the unknown. As I drove, the landscape changed from the bustling city to winding roads flanked by dense trees that seemed to whisper secrets. The air grew palpably heavier, and I couldn't help but feel an eerie sense of foreboding as I approached the town. Once I arrived, I was struck by the silence. Cedar Hill was smaller than I had imagined, with quaint houses lining the streets and a few shops that looked like they hadn't seen a customer in ages. It felt as though I had stepped into a time capsule, frozen in the past. I parked my car near the town square, taking a deep breath before stepping out. I could sense the weight of history pressing down on me. I wandered through the square, eyes scanning my surroundings. A mural caught my attention. A collage of newspaper clippings detailing the cult's activities, the disappearances, the fear that had gripped this community. I approached it, Reading the headlines aloud to myself, local pastor accused of ritual sacrifices, missing persons linked to cult activity, and Cedar Hill residents live in fear. "This is it," I murmured, my heart racing. As I stood there lost in thought, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her late 60s, her hair a wild halo of silver curls. "You don't look like you're from around here," she said, her voice steady yet cautious. "I'm not. I'm Laura, a journalist," I replied, trying to sound friendly. "I'm here to investigate the cult that used to be in this town." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You're brave, I'll give you that. Most folks around here prefer to forget. Is that why it's so quiet? The past is still haunting this place, isn't it?" I pressed gently, hoping to coax some information from her. She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to overhear. "We've all got our demons, dear. Cedar Hill isn't what it used to be. People don't talk about Blake and his cult. You might want to leave well enough alone." "I can't do that. People deserve to know the truth," I insisted, feeling the fire of my conviction burning brighter. "Just watch your back," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper, before she turned and walked away. I stood there, contemplating her words. What had happened in this town that would make its residents so afraid? I felt a deepening determination to uncover the truth. With renewed purpose, I made my way to the local library, hoping to find more information about the cult and its members. The library smelled of old books and dust, a comforting scent that reminded me of countless afternoons spent in similar places. I approached the librarian, a kind-looking woman with thick glasses perched on her nose. "Excuse me, I'm looking for information on the cult that was active in Cedar Hill in the 90s. Her expression shifted to one of concern. "You're not the first to ask, but I must warn you, dear, digging into that history can be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked, unable to mask my curiosity. "People have strong feelings about it. Some want to forget, others want to keep it alive. It's a divisive topic," she explained, her voice low. "But if you're serious, I might have some archives in the back." I nodded eagerly, feeling like a detective on the brink of a major breakthrough. As she led me to the back room, the air thickened with anticipation. I could feel that I was about to uncover something significant, something that could change everything. After a few minutes of searching, she returned with a stack of old newspapers and files. "Here you go," she said, placing them on the table. "Be careful with these. They're fragile." I thanked her and immediately began sifting through the documents. Each article painted a vivid picture of Cedar Hill's troubled past, stories of people who had vanished without a trace, of families torn apart by the cult's influence. As I read, I felt an unsettling connection to the pain and fear that had permeated this town decades ago. "Laura?" The librarian's voice cut through my concentration. "Yes?" I looked up, startled. "There's something else you should know. Some say that the past isn't entirely gone, that the shadows of Cedar Hill still linger." Her words hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hinting at something much darker than I had anticipated. "What do you mean?" I pressed, leaning forward. "I mean that some believe the cult's influence is still felt here, that those who were involved never truly left." My pulse quickened as I considered her words. I had come to uncover the truth, but what if I was walking directly into a trap laid by the very shadows I sought to expose? I felt a mix of excitement and dread. There was so much more to uncover, and I was just beginning to scratch the surface of Cedar Hill's dark history. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over Cedar Hill, I felt a chill creeping into the air. The echoes of the past seemed to whisper through the rustling leaves, urging me to delve deeper into the secrets that lay hidden within this small town. It was here that I was to meet Sarah, a former member of the cult, led by the enigmatic Reverend David Blake. My heart raced as I approached the small, weathered house where she lived, its peeling paint and cracked windows a testament to years of neglect. I knocked on the door, my fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 50s. Her hair, once vibrant, was now a dull shade of gray, and her eyes bore the weight of unspeakable memories. "Laura Jenkins?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'm here to talk about the cult, I replied, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite the unease settling in my stomach. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I entered, feeling as if I was crossing a threshold into a different world. The living room was sparsely furnished, filled with dusty books and faded photographs that seemed to tell stories of happier times. Would you like some tea? She offered, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for a kettle on the stove. Sure, that would be great, thank you, I said, trying to ease the tension that hung in the air. As she prepared the tea, I took a moment to observe her. There was a fragility to her, a sense of vulnerability that made me want to protect her from the shadows of her past. Once we were seated, I decided to dive in. Sarah, I know this is difficult, but I really need to understand what happened during your time in the cult. I've been researching, and it seems like a lot of people disappeared or suffered terribly. Her eyes darkened as she took a sip of her tea. David Blake wasn't just a charismatic leader. He was a manipulator. He knew how to prey on our fears and desires. We thought we were seeking enlightenment, but it was all a facade. She paused, her voice trembling. The rituals, they were meant to purify us, but they often ended in bloodshed. We were led to believe it was for a higher purpose. What kind of rituals? I pressed, my pen poised over my notebook, eager to capture every detail. There were fires, chants, and sacrifices, she whispered, her gaze drifting to a photograph on the wall. We believed we were summoning something powerful, something divine. But all we did was awaken a darkness that should have remained asleep. A shiver ran down my spine. What do you mean by darkness? She leaned closer, her voice barely audible. Some of us began to see visions, terrifying images of a figure cloaked in shadows. It was as if there was something watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I still hear the whispers sometimes. Her eyes widened with fear, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Did anyone else experience this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, she said, her hands wringing nervously, but those who spoke out were silenced. I was lucky to escape. Others, they vanished without a trace. I felt my heart sink at her words. What about the disappearances? Do you think they were sacrifices? She nodded slowly, a tear escaping her eye. I don't know for sure, but I can't shake the feeling that they were. David always spoke of cleansing the community, of purging evil. I was young and naive, believing in his vision. It wasn't until I saw the first sacrifice that I realized the horror of it all. How did you escape? I asked, genuinely curious. I was fortunate, she replied, her voice steadier now. I had a friend inside who warned me. One night during a ritual, I slipped away. I ran until I could no longer hear the chanting, until I felt safe. Her expression turned distant, lost in the memories. But the scars remain. I've never been the same since. Just then, the door swung open and a man entered the room. I recognized him immediately from the photos I had seen in the archives. Mark Turner, the ex-member I had heard whispers about. His presence filled the room, and I felt an electric tension in the air. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't know you had company, Sarah. It's okay, Mark, she replied, giving him a reassuring smile. Laura is just asking about the cult. Mark turned to me, his eyes searching. You're the journalist who's digging into all of this? Yes, I admitted, my pulse quickening. I'm trying to understand what happened here. He crossed his arms, a guarded expression on his face. Be careful. Cedar Hill isn't just a ghost town, it's haunted. I know, I said, looking him in the eye. That's why I'm here. I need to know the truth. He studied me for a moment before nodding slowly. All right, but it's not an easy road. The memories, they can consume you. I'm ready, I replied, my determination solidifying. Mark took a seat beside Sarah, his posture relaxed yet tense. What did Sarah tell you? He asked, glancing at her. About the rituals and the disappearances, I said, meeting his gaze. I want to know more about your experiences as well. He hesitated, his expression darkening. It's complicated. I thought I was part of something special, something bigger than myself, but it turned out to be a nightmare. What do you mean? I pressed, sensing his reluctance. I lost friends to that cult, people I cared about. They were taken by Blake's delusions, believing in his promises of salvation, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was one of the lucky ones, but the guilt lingers. Sometimes I wonder if I could have saved them. The weight of his words hung in the air, and I could feel the pain radiating from him. "You left, though. That takes courage." Mark shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "Courage or cowardice? I fled because I was scared. I didn't want to end up on the altar like others." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You can't blame yourself for that, Mark. None of us knew what we were getting into." I watched their interaction, sensing a shared bond forged through their trauma. "What happened during the rituals?" I asked, eager to gather more insight. Mark's eyes darkened. "It was a twisted form of worship. We were led to believe that pain was a path to enlightenment. They used our fears against us, made us believe we needed to suffer to be saved." "And you participated?" I inquired, feeling a mix of horror and fascination. "At first, I thought it was just a way to connect with something greater," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But as the rituals grew darker, I realized it was all a lie. It was about control, not salvation." "Did you ever see anything supernatural?" I pressed, my curiosity piqued. He hesitated, glancing at Sarah before answering. "There were moments, flashes of something, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, whispers in the dark. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but then..." He trailed off, lost in thought. "But you can't ignore it, can you?" I said, sensing the struggle within him. "No," he finally replied, his voice firm. "I can't. And neither can you, Laura. The past isn't done with us. It lingers, waiting to reclaim what it lost." As the weight of his words settled over me, I felt a chill creep into the room. This was no longer just a story, it was a living nightmare, and I was determined to unearth the truth, no matter the cost. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as I sat at my cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of yellowed papers and faded photographs from Cedar Hill. I had spent hours sifting through the remnants of the past, trying to piece together the fragmented stories of those who had lived through the horrors of David Blake's cult. As I flipped through the pages of a worn-out file, something caught my eye. A diary. The ink was still legible, and as I read the first few lines, I felt a shiver run down my spine. October 12th, 1992, the night of the ceremony. I saw her. She spoke to me in a voice that echoed like thunder. "They say she is a messenger of the dark. I can feel her presence even now." I couldn't shake the feeling that this diary held more than just the musings of a frightened soul. It contained a warning, a glimpse into something far more sinister. My heart raced as I continued to read, each line drawing me deeper into the chilling account of rituals and visions. "Laura?" Mark's voice interrupted my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. He stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What are you working on?" I gestured for him to come closer, my finger tracing the words on the page. "I found this diary from someone who was involved in the cult. They talk about visions, about an entity that was summoned during the rituals." I looked up at him, searching for any sign of recognition. "Do you remember anything like that?" Mark's brow furrowed as he took the diary from my hands. I had nightmares about it. They would gather in the woods, chanting. I could see shadows moving, but I always thought it was just my mind playing tricks." He paused, swallowing hard. "But what if it wasn't?" I leaned closer, the intensity of our conversation wrapping around us like a thick fog. "What if those shadows were real? What if they're still here, waiting for someone to unleash them again?" Mark shivered, and I could see the memories flooding back to him. "I thought I was free of all that. I thought it was just a bad dream," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But now, I don't know." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We can figure this out together, Mark. We have to understand what happened. We have to confront whatever it is that still lingers in Cedar Hill." He nodded slowly, though doubt still clouded his eyes. "Okay, but we need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, then we're playing with something we might not be able to control." I felt a surge of determination. "Then we need to know what we're dealing with. Let's visit that property, the old church where the rituals were held. Maybe we can find more clues about this entity." Mark hesitated, glancing towards the window as if he could see the shadows lurking outside. "You really think we'll find something there? What if it's too dangerous?" "We can't let fear dictate our actions. If we're going to put this to rest, we have to face it head on," I insisted, my voice steady. "Besides, we're not alone. We have each other." He took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." As we drove towards the old church, an unsettling silence enveloped us. The trees lining the road seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I could sense Mark's anxiety radiating off him, and I fought to keep my own fears at bay. When we arrived, the church stood ominously against the fading light, its windows shattered and its doors hanging off their hinges. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. "Are you ready?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He nodded, though I could see the tension in his jaw. "Let's just get this over with." We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath our weight. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the broken windows, and I could almost hear the echoes of past ceremonies whispering in the air. My heart raced as I scanned the room, searching for anything that could provide insight into the dark history that lurked within these walls. "Look over there," Mark said, pointing towards a corner where the walls were covered in strange symbols. They looked almost like a twisted language, and as I stepped closer, I could feel a chill creeping up my spine. "What do you think they mean?" I asked, tracing my fingers over the markings. "I don't know," he replied, his voice laced with unease. "But they look familiar. I think I saw something like this during the rituals." My mind raced as I connected the dots. The diary mentioned a ceremony involving symbols. What if these are the same ones? Mark swallowed hard, his eyes wide. "We need to be careful. This place feels wrong, like it's alive." I nodded, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. "Let's keep looking. There has to be something here that can help us understand." We moved deeper into the church, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and twist around us, playing tricks on my mind. I could hear a faint whisper in the distance, almost like a chant, and I felt my heart race as I turned to Mark. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression grave. "Yeah, it's like they're calling to us." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the church, causing us both to jump. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I instinctively grabbed Mark's arm. "What was that?" "I don't know, but we should check it out," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We cautiously approached the source of the noise, our footsteps echoing in the silence. As we rounded a corner, we found ourselves in a small room filled with old artifacts and remnants of the cult's activities. The walls were lined with more symbols, and in the center of the room was an altar, stained with something dark and congealed. "What happened here?" I whispered, horrified by the sight. Mark stepped closer, examining the altar. This is where it all happened. This is where they performed the rituals." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I imagined the horrors that had taken place in this very spot. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaky. "This place is cursed." But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across the wall. My breath caught in my throat as I turned back, but there was nothing there, just the darkness, looming and oppressive. "Laura?" Mark's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see him staring at me, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. "I just felt like something was watching us." "Maybe we should leave," he suggested, his voice low. "This feels too dangerous." As we turned to exit, the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent. I could feel a sense of urgency building in my chest, compelling me to stay. "No, we can't leave yet. We need to find out what this all means." Mark glanced around, his expression torn. "What if we're putting ourselves in danger? What if the entity is real?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Then we confront it. We can't let fear control us, Mark. We need to understand what we're dealing with." He hesitated, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Okay, but let's be quick." We began to search the room more thoroughly, scanning for anything that could provide answers. As I rifled through some old papers, a sudden chill swept through the air, causing me to shiver uncontrollably. "Did you feel that?" I asked, looking over at Mark. "Yeah," he replied, his voice tense. "It's like the temperature just dropped." Before I could respond, the shadows around us seemed to thicken, swirling like smoke. I stumbled back, instinctively reaching for Mark's arm. "What is happening?" "I don't know," he shouted, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here now." But as we turned to flee, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest, and I turned to Mark, my voice trembling. "What do we do?" "We find a way out," he said, determination flickering in his eyes. But I could see the fear lurking just beneath the surface. The whispers grew louder, echoing around us, and I could feel the weight of the entity pressing down on us. "We have to confront it," I breathed, though doubt crept into my mind. "Laura, this isn't the time for bravado," Mark shouted, his voice rising. "We need to escape before it's too late." But deep down, I knew that running was not an option. The shadows were already closing in, and the only way to free ourselves was to face the darkness head-on. "No, we're not leaving until we uncover the truth. We can't let it win." As the shadows converged, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The air was thick with a sense of dread as I walked alongside Mark towards Emily's house. Cedar Hill had a way of making you feel like you were being watched, as if the very shadows held secrets that were better left undiscovered. I glanced at Mark, whose face was a mix of determination and lingering fear. I could tell that the memories of his past were still haunting him like a relentless specter. I had my own fears too, but I was determined to push through, to uncover the truth behind the darkness that had gripped this town for too long. As we approached the modest home, I felt a chill run down my spine. Emily was waiting for us on the porch, her expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you about what I saw, about my father." "Of course, Emily," I replied, trying to offer her some comfort. "We're here to help you. Can you tell us what you experienced?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I had a vision, a dream, I guess. It felt so real. I saw my dad. He was trapped in some kind of place. It was dark, and there were these strange symbols everywhere, like the ones we've seen in the old articles." Her eyes widened with urgency, and there were voices whispering. They said he was caught between worlds. "Between worlds," Mark echoed, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she exclaimed, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I felt it. I felt him calling out to me. He's still alive, I know it." Mark looked at me, and I could sense the unresolved pain in his gaze. "There's a possibility that your father is still out there, Emily," I said gently, trying to maintain a sense of hope. "But we need to investigate further. We need to find out what happened during those rituals." "Please," Emily urged, her voice shaking. "I can help. I know the stories, and I can show you where the old meetings were held." "Let's do it then," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "Lead the way." Emily nodded, and we followed her down the narrow path leading into a wooded area behind her house. The trees loomed overhead like sentinels, their branches twisting together in a tangled web. It felt as if we were stepping into another world, one where the past and present merged into something dark and foreboding. As we walked, I could feel Mark's tension. "Are you okay?" I asked him softly. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning our surroundings. "I'm fine," he replied, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. "It's just being back here. It brings up a lot of memories." "Memories can be ghosts," I said, trying to reassure him. "But we're not here to let them haunt us. We're here to set things right." He nodded, but I could tell that the shadows of his past were still clinging to him. As we reached a clearing, Emily stopped and pointed to the ground. "This is where they used to gather. They drew symbols in the dirt and performed rituals." I knelt down, inspecting the ground. "These symbols, they look familiar," I murmured. They were similar to the ones we had seen in the old photographs, the ones that had filled my mind with dread ever since I had first laid eyes on them. Mark crouched beside me, his expression grave. "I remember this place. It was where they tried to purify us," he said bitterly. "I thought I had buried it all, but it's like they're all coming back." "Let's try to focus on what Emily saw," I suggested, aware that Mark's memories could easily spiral into darkness. "Emily, did you see anything else in your vision?" She bit her lip, her brow furrowing in concentration. "There was a figure, someone watching. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their presence. It was overwhelming." My stomach churned at her words. "A figure? Do you think it could be one of the leaders from the cult?" "I don't know," she said, trembling, "but something about them felt wrong, like they were in control of everything." Mark looked at her, his eyes widening. "What if they're still out there? What if they're watching us right now?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," I said, trying to keep the fear at bay. "We need to gather more information. Emily, do you know of any other locations that might be significant?" She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "There's an old church on the outskirts of town where they used to hold meetings. I've heard it's abandoned now, but it might still have some clues." "Then that's our next stop," I declared, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "We need to find out what happened to your father, and we need to understand what we're dealing with." As we made our way back to Emily's house, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the shadows were alive with eyes that were too familiar. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to uncover the truths that had been buried for far too long. Later that evening, as we sat in Emily's living room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. I could see the flickering light of a candle casting shadows on the walls, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us. "Emily, are you sure you want to do this?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. "I have to know," she replied resolutely. "I can't live with the uncertainty. I need to find my dad, no matter what it takes." Mark shifted in his seat, his gaze distant. "I understand, but we have to be careful. We don't know what we're up against." "I'll be careful," she promised, but I could see the determination in her eyes. "I need to do this for him." "All right," I said, nodding. "Then let's prepare for tomorrow. We'll go to the church and see what we can find." As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something monumental, something that could change everything. The shadows of Cedar Hill felt more alive than ever, whispering secrets that had been hidden for decades. And as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me as visions of the past danced behind my eyelids. Visions of rituals, of lost souls, and of the malevolent force that seemed to lurk just beyond the veil of reality. I knew that whatever lay ahead would test us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. But as I stared into the darkness, I felt a flicker of hope. We were on the path to uncovering the truth, and perhaps in doing so, we could finally bring light to the shadows of Cedar Hill. The fluorescent lights of my small apartment flickered as I sat at my desk, the pale glow illuminating the stacks of papers and old photographs I had collected about the Cedar Hill cult. It had been a few weeks since I received that anonymous message, the one that had piqued my curiosity about the shadows of Cedar Hill. I could still feel the chill that crept down my spine whenever I thought about it. The image of those old rituals lingered in my mind, grotesque and haunting. I picked up my phone, the device feeling unusually heavy in my hand. Just as I was about to scroll through the photos from my last visit to Cedar Hill, it vibrated against the wood of the desk. Frowning, I glanced at the screen, my heart racing as I noticed an incoming message from an unknown number. "Look beyond the veil, Laura. The truth is waiting." My breath hitched. Who could this be? Was it someone from Cedar Hill? Or perhaps an old member of the cult trying to reach out? I typed back quickly, "Who is this?" But my message was met with silence. Frustrated, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, running my fingers through my hair. I had started to feel the weight of the investigation bearing down on me. The more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was being watched. It was unsettling. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for me. The messages continued, each one more cryptic than the last. "The past is alive," one read. Another simply said, "He is watching." My anxiety grew as I tried to decipher what these messages meant. It was as if someone wanted me to dig deeper, but what were they leading me to? One evening, as I sat cross-legged on my living room floor surrounded by papers and books, I heard a light knock at my door. I hesitated, but eventually stood up, curiosity getting the better of me. It wasn't unusual for me to have visitors, but the timing was peculiar. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Mark standing there, his face drawn and weary. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about our last conversation." "Come in," I invited, sensing his unease. He stepped inside, glancing around as if he expected something sinister to leap out at him. "I'm sorry for just dropping by, but I need to talk," Mark continued, his eyes darting nervously. "I've been having these dreams." "Dreams?" I prompted, gesturing for him to take a seat on the couch. He sat down, the weight of his past hanging heavily in the air between us. "Yeah, they feel so real. It's like I'm back there again, in the middle of those rituals," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I can see their faces, hear the chanting. And there's this one figure, always watching. It's terrifying." I nodded, understanding the depth of his trauma. "I can only imagine," I said softly. "But maybe it's your mind trying to process what happened. We've been digging up a lot of painful memories. Or maybe it's something more," he shot back, his eyes wide. "What if those memories are trying to tell us something? What if that entity is still out there, trying to reach us?" The thought sent a chill down my spine. "I've been getting strange messages too," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "They seem to be connected to the cult. It's like someone is trying to guide me towards something." "Guide you?" Mark leaned forward, his expression intense. "Or manipulate you?" I shrugged, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "I don't know. I just feel like we're being watched, like someone knows what we're doing." Mark's gaze shifted to the window, his brow furrowing as he stared into the darkness outside. "I hate this. I thought leaving Cedar Hill would free me, but it feels like I'm still trapped." "Maybe we can find a way to confront it together," I suggested, trying to offer some semblance of hope. "We can dig deeper, find out who is sending those messages and what they want from us." He nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I'd like that, but we have to be careful. I'm not sure what we're up against." As the conversation waned, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of something monumental. As if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into an abyss. We decided to meet again the following day to strategize our next steps. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I climbed into bed, hoping that sleep would offer an escape. But sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, haunted by the shadows of my own thoughts. Around 3 a.m. my phone buzzed again, breaking the silence of my restless night. I glanced at the screen and my heart sank. Another message. "Laura, the truth is closer than you think. You must look beyond the veil." I stared at the message, feeling both terrified and compelled. What did it mean? Who was behind it? I had to know. I woke up exhausted the next morning, my mind racing with unanswered questions. As I prepared for the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming to a head. I needed answers. I met Mark at the local diner, the sun spilling through the windows, casting warm light on the grimy tables. He looked up as I walked in, his face shadowed with concern. "Did you get any more messages?" he asked, urgency lacing his words. I nodded, sliding into the booth across from him. "They keep coming. It's like they know what I'm doing, what I'm planning." "Maybe they want you to stop," he replied, his tone serious. "Or maybe they want to guide you to something. Or someone," I added, my heart racing. "I can't shake the feeling that we're being led straight into a trap." "Then we need to figure out who's behind it," he said, determination shining in his eyes. "We need to confront this head-on." As we discussed our options over coffee, I couldn't shake the sense that we were teetering on the edge of something much darker than we could comprehend. Each message felt like a thread pulling us deeper into a web of secrets, and I was terrified of what we might uncover. But alongside that fear was an undeniable need to know the truth. "Laura," Mark said suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. "What if we're not just dealing with the past? What if something more sinister is at play?" I leaned back, taking a deep breath. We have to be prepared for anything. Whatever we find, we face it together. He nodded, his expression resolute. And in that moment, I knew we were bound by something far deeper than our shared trauma. We were tied together by the pursuit of the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the ancient property that once belonged to the cult. The wind howled through the trees, sounding almost like whispers of the past, urging us to turn back. But we couldn't. Not now. Not after everything we had uncovered. "Are you sure about this?" Mark's voice broke through the unsettling silence as he stood beside me, his brow furrowed in concern. I could see the tremor in his hands, a stark reminder of the trauma he had endured. "I have to believe it's the only way," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If we can confront whatever is haunting this place, maybe we can stop it from tormenting us any longer." He nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "I just wish we had more information. We don't even know what we're dealing with." "I know," I said, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "But the diary mentioned a ritual that could weaken the entity. We have to try." We stepped into the dilapidated house, the floor creaking beneath our weight. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight that filtered through the broken windows. As we made our way to what I assumed was the cult's meeting room, the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Do you feel that?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I admitted, shivering despite the warmth of my jacket. "It's like something is here with us." We reached the center of the room, where an old, rotting altar stood, covered in dust and grime. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, chants and screams woven into the very fabric of the walls. "This is where it happened," I murmured, staring at the altar, imagining the dark rituals that had taken place here. Mark stepped closer, examining the altar with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "We need to set up the ritual. Do you have everything?" I pulled the items from my bag: candles, herbs, and a small bowl of salt. "Yes, I gathered everything we need. We just have to remember the steps." We lit the candles, their flames flickering nervously, as if they sensed the darkness that lingered. I arranged the herbs in a circle around the altar and sprinkled salt in a protective line, my hands trembling slightly. With each item placed, I recited the incantation I had memorized from the diary, feeling the weight of the words as they left my lips. "Laura," Mark said suddenly, his voice tight with urgency. "Did you hear that?" I paused, straining to listen. At first, I heard nothing but the wind outside. Then, faintly, a low whisper echoed through the room, growing louder, more insistent. "Get out! Who's there?" I called out, my heart racing. The air thickened and I felt a chill wash over me. "Show yourself!" The whisper morphed into a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate than the last. "Leave now! You disturb the peace!" "Laura, I don't think this is a good idea," Mark shouted, taking a step back, his eyes wide with fear. I pressed my hands against the altar, grounding myself. "We can't stop now. We need to finish the ritual." As I continued the incantation, the shadows in the room began to writhe and pulse, darkening the corners of my vision. I could feel a presence, heavy and oppressive, closing in around us. "I command you to reveal yourself," I yelled, my voice trembling but resolute. Suddenly, the flames of the candles flickered wildly, and I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the room. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the altar for support. "Mark, stay close." Before I could catch my breath, a vision struck me like a lightning bolt. I was no longer in the room with Mark. I was transported to a darkened clearing, surrounded by hooded figures chanting in unison. In the center stood David Blake, a sinister smile stretching across his face as he raised his arms to the sky. "Embrace the darkness," he commanded, and the ground trembled beneath me. "Laura," I heard Mark's voice, distant and distorted. "Laura, are you okay?" I couldn't respond. I was trapped in the vision. I watched as the hooded figures began to sway, their bodies moving in a hypnotic rhythm. The air throbbed with a dark energy, and I could feel it pulling at me, trying to drag me into its depths. "Fight it!" Mark's voice broke through again, clearer this time. "You have to fight it!" With every ounce of willpower, I focused on Mark's voice, trying to anchor myself back to reality. "Mark," I screamed, but the sound echoed into a void, swallowed by the darkness surrounding me. Then, just as suddenly, I was back in the room, gasping for air. I looked around frantically, my heart pounding. "Mark, where are you?" "I'm right here," he yelled, his face pale as he rushed to my side. "What happened? You just zoned out." I saw him," I stammered, still reeling from the vision. "David Blake. He was leading a ceremony, and the energy, it was so strong. We need to finish the ritual." Mark looked at me, fear etched in his features. "But what if it's not over? What if he's still here? Then we have to confront him. We can't let him control us any longer." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Let's finish this." As we resumed our ritual, the shadows began to swirl around us again, and I could feel the entity's presence growing stronger. I closed my eyes, focusing on the words I needed to say. By the light of these candles, I banish you from this place. You have no power here. Suddenly, the room erupted in chaos. The candles flickered violently, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. You cannot escape. You belong to us. Laura, Mark cried out, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Stay with me. I'm here, I shouted back, but my voice was drowned out by the rising tide of darkness. I felt the pressure closing in, tightening around my chest as if the very shadows were trying to suffocate me. Fight it, Mark urged, his hands gripping my shoulders tightly. Don't let it take you. I opened my eyes, looking into his. In that moment, I felt a surge of determination. Together, I said, my voice steadier. We can do this together. With a renewed sense of purpose, I raised my voice above the chaos, reciting the incantation louder and more forcefully. By the power of the light, I command you to leave this place. You have no hold over us. The shadows writhed violently, and for a brief moment, I could see the outline of a dark figure emerging from the depths. It was then that I realized, this entity thrived on fear. It fed off of our doubts and insecurities, but we had the power to fight back. Mark, we need to focus on the light, I urged. Think of everything we've overcome, everyone we've lost. Our strength comes from each other. As we channeled our energy into the ritual, the entity screamed, a sound filled with rage and desperation. You cannot defeat me. But we pressed on, the flames of the candles burning brighter, illuminating the darkness that surrounded us. We are not afraid, we shouted in unison, our voices echoing in the room. And then in a flash, everything went white. The air was thick with tension as I slowly regained consciousness, blinking against the dim light that filtered through the broken windows of the old property. My heart raced, driven by the remnants of the vision that had just engulfed me. It wasn't just a dream, it was a revelation. I could still feel the shadows pressing down on me, the weight of the secrets I had unearthed. Mark hovered over me, his expression a mix of concern and fear. Laura, thank God you're awake, he said, his voice trembling. You scared me. I thought I lost you. I pushed myself up on my elbows, wincing as the pain shot through my head. Mark, I saw something important. The memory of the ceremony flooded back, vivid and disturbing. David Blake, he was there. I saw him, and there was a ritual, a final one. Mark's brow furrowed as he leaned closer, the urgency in his eyes growing. What do you mean? What did you see? We need to know everything. Taking a deep breath, I recalled the details of my vision, the way the air had crackled with energy, the chanting voices echoing in the background. It was like I was there, in the middle of it. There were people, all wearing those white robes, and Blake, he was standing at the center, leading them. But it was different this time. There was a power, a darkness that surrounded him. He wasn't just a man, he was something else entirely. Mark's jaw clenched in disbelief. What do you mean, something else? I nodded, trying to shake off the remnants of disorientation. He was manipulating them, Mark. I could feel it. The energy was feeding off their fear and despair. It was intoxicating to him, like it gave him strength. This wasn't just a cult. It was a conduit for something much more sinister. God, he breathed, running a hand through his hair. We have to find out where this happened. We need to get proof, something that can help us stop him. As I gathered my thoughts, I could see the determination building in him. It was contagious, igniting a fire within me. There has to be a place connected to this ceremony. I remember bits and pieces. An old church? Maybe. Or a forest clearing. Let's go through the materials we have, he suggested, his voice firm. Maybe one of the ex-members mentioned something in their accounts that could lead us to it. We hastily rummaged through the files spread across the floor, old newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes from interviews with ex-members. Each page felt like a breadcrumb, leading us closer to the truth. Wait, I exclaimed, pointing to a faded newspaper article. Look at this one. The headline read, Mysterious Disappearance Linked to Cult Activity. Beneath it was a photograph of a dilapidated church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. This could be it. It matches the vision. Mark peered closer, excitement etched across his face. That church was abandoned years ago. It's on the outskirts of Cedar Hill. We need to check it out. As we prepared to leave, I felt a chill sweep through me. The entity I had felt in my vision lingered, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. "Mark, do you think Blake knows we're looking for him?" "I wouldn't put it past him," he replied, his tone grave. "But we can't let fear stop us. We need to confront this head-on." We drove to the outskirts of Cedar Hill, the landscape growing increasingly desolate as we approached the abandoned church. The air felt heavy, laden with unspoken horrors and secrets that had festered for too long. As we parked, I couldn't help but notice the way the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. "It's almost like the land itself is holding its breath," I whispered, a sense of dread creeping in. Mark stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the area. "Let's just be cautious. We don't know what we're walking into." The church loomed before us, its once white facade now a decaying shade of gray, ivy creeping up its walls like grasping fingers. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, and I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the echo of long-forgotten prayers. As we stepped further in, I spotted remnants of the past. Broken pews, shattered stained glass, and strange symbols etched into the floor. "This place, it feels wrong," I murmured, glancing at Mark, who seemed equally unnerved. "Look at this," he said, kneeling beside a pile of debris. He uncovered an old, tattered book, its pages worn and yellowed. "It looks like a ritual text." I leaned over to examine it, my heart racing as the words jumped out at me. "These are the same symbols from my vision. This is it, Mark. This is what they were using." As we flipped through the pages, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the church, and the shadows around us flickered ominously. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," he replied, standing up. "It's getting colder." "We should." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the church, causing us both to jump. My heart pounded in my chest as I exchanged a worried glance with Mark. "What was that?" "Stay close," he warned, moving cautiously toward the sound. I followed, my instincts screaming that we were not alone. As we rounded a corner, we stumbled upon a small room filled with remnants of past rituals. Candles, remnants of offerings, and more of those disturbing symbols. It was then that I noticed something etched into the wall, a phrase that sent a chill down my spine. "The shadows will always return. Laura?" Mark's voice trembled as he pointed to a corner. There, hidden beneath the debris, was a small box. "Do you think it contains anything important?" "It could be," I replied, my curiosity piqued. "Let's see what's inside." As we opened the box, a rush of cold air burst forth, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Inside were photographs, images of the cult's gatherings, their rituals, and in the center of one, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching over the proceedings. "Who is that?" Mark asked, leaning closer. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But it feels like they were always there, always watching. Just like now." Mark's gaze shot around the room, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "We need to find out who this is. It could be the key to understanding everything." Just then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows, cloaked in darkness, watching us. My heart raced, and I felt the urge to run. "Mark, did you see that?" I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. "What? What did you see?" "There was someone over there," I pointed, but when Mark looked, there was nothing but the shadows dancing against the walls. "Laura, we need to focus," he urged, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "We can't let this place get to us." But as we turned back to the box, the feeling of dread deepened. The shadows felt alive, almost sentient, and I couldn't shake the feeling that David Blake's presence loomed over us, an ominous reminder that we were stepping into a web of darkness far beyond our comprehension. "Let's get out of here," I said, fighting back the rising panic. "We need to regroup and analyze what we found. We can't do this alone anymore." Mark nodded, his expression resolute. "You're right, we need a plan, but we have to be careful. There's more at stake than we realize." As we exited the church, I felt the lingering presence of the entity, a whisper in the back of my mind. The shadows of Cedar Hill were not finished with us yet, and I could only hope that we were strong enough to face whatever lay ahead. The air in the old, abandoned house was thick with dust, and the palpable weight of forgotten memories. I could feel the tension crackling between Mark and me as we sat across from one another in the dim light, the flickering of the single bulb overhead casting eerie shadows on the walls. We had just uncovered a shocking truth that threatened to unravel everything we thought we knew. The figure in the video, the one cloaked in shadows at the cult's final ceremony, was someone we had both known well, someone who had been close to us during this investigation. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling slightly. This changes everything. How could we not see it before?" My heart raced as I spoke, the weight of the revelation pressing heavily on my chest. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "I don't know, Laura. I thought I knew everyone who was involved back then. I thought I had left that life behind." "Clearly you didn't," I said, frustration seeping into my tone. "You were manipulated. We both were. But this person, whoever they are, they've been playing us like puppets." Mark's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Who do you think it is? Who is that figure? Do you think they're still working with Blake?" I swallowed hard, trying to quell the rising anxiety that threatened to consume me. "I don't know, but we have to find out. We need to confront them before it's too late." There was a long pause as Mark stared at the floor, lost in thought. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the fear and doubt etched on his face. I think I might know who it is," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "Who?" I pressed, my heart racing at the thought of uncovering more secrets. "It's someone I've seen around town. Someone who seemed too familiar with the cult's history. Someone who always asked questions about my past." Mark's brow furrowed as he continued. "I thought they were just curious, but now I'm not so sure. Mark, we need to approach this carefully. If they're as involved as we suspect, they won't take kindly to us digging into their past," I cautioned, sensing the urgency in the air. "Yeah, I get it," he replied, his voice laced with frustration. "But I can't just sit here and let them manipulate us any longer. I need to know the truth, Laura." I nodded, understanding the fire that burned within him. "Okay, let's do this together. We'll confront them. We'll get to the bottom of this." As we prepared to leave the house, an unsettling feeling washed over me, an instinctive dread that something was very wrong. I glanced at Mark, who seemed lost in his own thoughts, his face pale and strained. "Are you sure you're ready for this? I know how much the past still haunts you," I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "Ready or not, we have to face it. I can't keep running from my past anymore," he replied, determination lacing his words. "I need to know who I really am, and if I was really free from Blake's influence." As we stepped out into the cool night air, the shadows seemed to cling to us, whispering secrets of a time long gone. The streets were eerily quiet. The only sounds were the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional croak of a frog. It felt as if Cedar Hill itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. We made our way to Mark's car, the tension between us palpable. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the fear of what we might discover weighing heavily on him. "Laura, if this person really is who I think they are, I don't know how I'm going to handle it," he confessed, his voice shaking slightly. "Just remember, we're in this together," I reassured him. "No matter what happens, we'll face it as a team. You're not alone." As we drove through the dimly lit streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows danced along the edges of the road, and the darkness felt alive, as if it was waiting for us to make a mistake. "Do you feel that?" I asked, glancing at Mark. "Yeah, it's like we're not alone," he replied, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "It's unsettling." We arrived at the cafe where Mark suspected the figure might be hiding. The place was mostly empty, save for a few patrons lost in their conversations. As we entered, I spotted a figure hunched over in a corner booth, their face partially obscured by the hood of a jacket. My heart raced as I recognized the familiar silhouette, and I could feel Mark's tension radiating through the air. "There they are," I whispered, barely able to contain my rising dread. "What do we do?" "We confront them," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "There's no other choice." With hesitant steps, we made our way toward the booth. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the anticipation building as we approached. The figure looked up, and I realized with a jolt that it was someone I had seen before. Someone who had been lurking in the background of our investigation, always seeming to know more than they let on. "Mark? Laura," the figure said, a sly smile creeping across their face. "I wondered when you two would come looking for me." "Cut the games," Mark snapped, his voice low and fierce. "We know what you're involved in. You were at the cult's final ceremony. You've been playing us this whole time, haven't you?" The figure leaned back, feigning nonchalance. "Playing? Oh, I wouldn't say that. It's more like guiding you to the truth." "Guiding us?" I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "You've been manipulating us from the start. Why? What do you want?" "Isn't it obvious?" they replied, their eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and something darker. "I want to show you the power of the cult, the power that still exists even if you refuse to accept it." Mark's frustration reached a boiling point. "You're sick. You think this is a game? People died because of that cult. You're just as culpable as Blake." The figure's smile widened, a glint of madness flickering in their eyes. "And yet, here you are, drawn to it like moths to a flame. You can't resist the allure of the darkness. It's in your blood, Mark." I felt a chill run down my spine at their words. "You don't know anything about us?" I shot back, my voice shaking slightly. "We're not going to let you manipulate us anymore." "Manipulate?" They laughed softly. "Oh, sweet Laura, you're already too late. You've opened the door to things you can't comprehend. It's only a matter of time before you're consumed by it." Mark's face twisted in anger and confusion. "What do you mean? What have we done?" "Everything you've uncovered has only strengthened the cult's hold on you," they replied, their tone dripping with satisfaction. "And you, Mark, you were never free. You just didn't realize it." The weight of their words settled around us like a heavy fog, and I could see the dawning horror in Mark's eyes. No, that can't be true," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I left. I chose to leave." "Did you?" the figure taunted, leaning closer. "Or were you just a pawn in a game far larger than you can imagine? You need to understand, Mark, that the control Blake had over you never truly faded. It lingered, waiting for the right moment to resurface." I could see Mark's resolve wavering, the fear creeping into his mind as the figure's words took root. "Stop it! You're lying," he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. "Am I? Look around you. You're still drawn to the shadows, still searching for answers that will ultimately lead you back to him," they said, their voice low and conspiratorial. "You can't escape what you are." I reached out, placing a steadying hand on Mark's arm. "Don't listen to them. We're stronger than this. We've come too far to let their manipulation pull us back in." Mark shook his head, his eyes haunted. "But what if they're right? What if I'm still under his influence?" "No," I insisted, my voice fierce. "You faced your demons. You fought through your trauma. You are not the same person you were back then. We both have the power to break free from this." The figure leaned back, an amused expression on their face. "You think you're strong enough to resist? You're both so naive. The darkness is always there, lurking. You'll never truly be free." As I stared into their eyes, I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "You're the one who's trapped. You're still clinging to the past, trying to manipulate others into following you. We won't be your pawns anymore." Mark straightened, his expression hardening as he met their gaze. "You may have tried to control me once, but I won't let you do it again. I'm done being a victim." The figure's smile faltered for a brief moment. The tension was palpable as Mark and I stood across from the hooded figure, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls of the abandoned warehouse. My heart raced, pounding like a war drum in my chest. I could feel the weight of everything we had uncovered pressing down on me. This person had been lurking in the background of our investigation. And now, here they were, unmasked and yet still shrouded in mystery. "Who the hell are you?" Mark demanded, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten as he fought to control his emotions. The figure chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, Mark, you really don't remember, do you? How sad. I was always there, watching, guiding, and manipulating." The voice was smooth, almost seductive, and I felt a shiver of recognition. "Enough games," I interjected, stepping forward. "We know you were involved with the cult. You've been playing us this entire time. What do you want?" The figure lowered their hood, revealing a familiar face that made my blood run cold. It was someone I never expected to see again, someone who had been a constant presence in Cedar Hill, always just out of reach, but never truly gone. "Surprised to see me, Laura?" The figure smirked. It was Alex, a former member of the cult, someone who had left Cedar Hill under circumstances that were never fully explained. "I've been keeping an eye on you both. You're so close to the truth, yet so far." "Why?" Mark's voice cracked, and I could hear the vulnerability beneath his bravado. "Why are you doing this? We thought you were one of the good ones." "Good ones?" Alex laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space around us. "You really think there are good and bad people in this world? It's all a game, Mark. A game of power, control, and survival. The weak perish, and the strong, they thrive." I felt Mark's hand twitch beside me, and I knew he was on the edge of losing control. "You're sick," he shouted, taking a step forward. "You've been playing with people's lives for your own gain." "Playing?" Alex replied, tilting their head, feigning innocence. "I've been shaping reality. Every whisper, every illusion, it's all part of the grand design. And you, Mark, you were a key player in that design. You just didn't know it." I could see Mark's face contort with rage and confusion. "What do you mean? I left the cult. I chose to be free." "Did you? Or were you simply a pawn, thinking you could escape?" Alex stepped closer, their eyes gleaming with a manic light. "You've always been tied to us, Mark. Even in your so-called freedom, you can't outrun the shadows." The atmosphere thickened with tension, and I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "You're lying. You've manipulated everyone, including him." I pointed at Mark, who looked like he had been punched in the gut. "Am I?" Alex's voice was almost mocking. "You see, Laura, the truth is far more complex. Mark's memories, his experiences, they were crafted, enhanced. The cult's influence never truly left him. It's embedded in his psyche." "Stop it!" Mark shouted, his fists clenching at his sides. "I'm not going to let you twist my reality anymore." But Alex wasn't done. "You think you're in control? That you can confront your past and walk away unscathed? That's adorable." They stepped back, their expression shifting from amusement to something darker. "You think you have power over me? Over what I know? But I'm not your enemy, Mark. I'm your truth." Suddenly, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What truth?" "Your truth," Alex said softly, almost tenderly. "The truth of who you really are, Mark. You've been living a lie, convinced you could escape your fate." They continued, their voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're not just a victim, you're a part of this. You always have been." I watched as Mark's face paled, the realization sinking in. No, that can't be true. I chose to leave. I chose to be free." His voice was rising, desperation creeping in. "Did you?" Alex pressed, their tone almost soothing. "Or were you simply manipulated into believing you had a choice? Tell me, how many times did you question your decision to leave? How many times did you wonder if you were truly free?" "Shut up," Mark yelled, but his voice wavered, and I could see the cracks forming in his facade. "You don't know anything about me." "Oh, but I do," Alex replied, their voice dripping with satisfaction. "I know everything. I know your fears, your desires, your weaknesses. I know that deep down, you're still one of us. You crave the power, the belonging. You just don't know how to embrace it." Mark took a step back, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. "I'm not like you. I'm not a monster." "Then prove it," Alex challenged, their eyes glinting with malice. "Face your past. Face the truth." I could see Mark teetering on the edge of a precipice, caught between the man he wanted to be and the dark shadow of his past. "You're wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to let you control me any longer." "Control?" Alex smirked. "You have no idea what control is. You're still under my influence. You always will be." In a sudden surge of anger, Mark lunged forward, fueled by a mix of rage and desperation. "Get away from me," he shouted, and in his haste, he reached out, his hand connecting with Alex's shoulder. But in an instant, everything spiraled out of control. I gasped as the scene unfolded before me. Alex stumbled back, eyes wide with shock, and Mark's hand fell away, only to connect with me instead. I felt a searing pain shoot through my side as I staggered, clutching my abdomen. "Laura?" Mark cried out, panic flooding his features as he turned toward me. "I didn't mean to." I gritted my teeth against the pain, forcing myself to focus. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though the blood seeping through my fingers told a different story. We need to focus on Alex, not me. But Alex was already recovering, a sinister smile spreading across their face. Look at the chaos you've created, Mark. You can't escape it. You can't escape me. Shut up, Mark shouted, anguish evident in his voice. This isn't about you. It's about breaking free. Is it? Alex's voice was a haunting whisper. You're just feeding into the cycle. You have a choice. Embrace the darkness or let it consume you. I could see Mark's resolve wavering as he wrestled with his emotions. No, I won't let you win. Then fight, Mark. Fight your own demons. Prove you're not just a puppet on a string. Alex taunted, taking a step closer, their presence looming over us like a dark cloud. Laura, Mark looked at me, fear and determination battling in his eyes. I need to end this. I need to prove to myself that I'm free. Then do it, I urged him. Face them. Face the truth, whatever it may be. As he turned back to Alex, I could see the flicker of determination igniting within him. But the pain in my side was growing more intense, and I could feel the darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. Mark, we can't let them win, I said, my voice steady despite the terror rising within me. You have the strength to fight this? We both do. Together? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if he was still unsure. Yes, together, I affirmed, even as I felt my strength waning. We can face whatever this is, but you have to believe in yourself. He took a deep breath, and for a moment I saw the man I knew, the man who fought to escape the shadows. I won't let you control me anymore, Alex, he said, his voice strong and unwavering. Not now, not ever. As we stood there, the air crackling with tension, I could sense that the battle was far from over. But I also knew that this was a pivotal moment, a turning point in our fight against the darkness that had haunted Cedar Hill for far too long. As shadows of Cedar Hill loomed heavy as Laura and I approached the dilapidated church that had once been the heart of David Blake's cult. The old building stood like a ghost, its windows shattered and its doors hanging off their hinges. But I could feel a pulse of energy emanating from within, beckoning us to step closer. My heart raced with a mixture of dread and determination. This was it, the moment we had been dreading, yet had worked tirelessly to reach. Mark, you ready for this? Laura asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, forcing a smile. But inside I felt a tempest of emotions swirling, fear, anger, and a flicker of hope that perhaps we could finally put an end to this nightmare. We pushed open the creaking door, and the air inside was thick with an unsettling silence. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced through the broken windows. As we stepped further inside, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us, the echoes of the past whispering threats that sent shivers down my spine. David Blake, Laura called into the darkness, her voice reverberating against the walls. We know you're here. A low chuckle filled the air, slithering around us like a serpent. Ah, Laura Jenkins and Mark Turner, a voice boomed, smooth and resonant. You've come to see your old friend. From the shadows emerged David Blake, but he was no longer the disheveled man I remembered. He wore a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, and his eyes sparkled with a malicious glint that sent a jolt of recognition through me. This was not just a man, he was an entity, a dark force masquerading as a spiritual guide. Look at you two, he continued, his tone dripping with mockery. So brave, yet so naive. Did you really think you could escape me? Escape? I spat, stepping forward. You think this is about escape? We're here to end you. Laura stood beside me, her expression fierce. You're nothing more than a parasite feeding off the pain and fear of others. Your reign of terror ends tonight. He laughed, a cold, chilling sound that echoed off the walls. You little fools. You think you can confront me with your bravado? I've thrived on fear for decades. You are merely shadows in my presence. And then I felt it. The familiar weight of dread creeping back into my chest, memories of blood rituals and whispered lies flooding my mind. The room seemed to darken, and for a moment, I faltered. No, I whispered, fighting against the rising tide of panic. I won't let you do this to me again. Ah, but you see, Mark, he said, his voice slithering into my ears like venom. You were never truly free. Your pain, your memories, they are mine to command. I exist in the shadows of your fears, and you have always been my puppet. No, I shouted, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. You don't control me anymore." "Such defiance is amusing," he replied, his expression darkening. "But it won't save you. I will always be in your shadows." I glanced at Laura, who nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. "Mark, we can do this together. We faced worse than him." I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of her trust seep into me. "You're right. We've come too far to turn back now." As if sensing our resolve, Blake's demeanor shifted. "You think you can banish me with mere words? I thrive on conflict, on despair. Let me show you how deep the darkness runs." He raised his hands, and the room began to warp around us. Shadows twisted and curled, taking on grotesque shapes that clawed at my mind. Visions of the past flickered before my eyes, excruciating memories of the cult's rituals, the screams of my fellow members, the blood-soaked ground where innocence had been sacrificed. I staggered back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mark!" Laura reached for me, her voice breaking through the haze. "Fight it! Remember who you are." I closed my eyes, grounding myself in the present. I could feel the warmth of Laura's hand, the bond we had forged through our shared trauma. "I won't let you win," I shouted, focusing on the anger that once consumed me. "You are nothing but a coward hiding behind manipulation." The shadows recoiled slightly, as if struck. Blake's eyes narrowed. "You think those words hold power? I am eternal." "Eternal?" I echoed, feeling a surge of strength. "You're a relic of the past, and your time has come to an end." I stepped forward, fueled by the countless lives he'd destroyed and the pain he'd inflicted, not just on me, but on so many others. "You will not take any more from us." With that, I reached deep into my core, recalling the memories that haunted me, every ritual, every scream, every drop of blood. I harnessed that pain, channeling it into a single thought: I would not be a victim any longer. "Together," I shouted, turning to Laura. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. We shouted in unison, raising our hands toward Blake as a wave of energy pulsed between us. The shadows writhed violently, the air crackling with our combined force. Light erupted from our hands, pushing back against the darkness that Blake commanded. "No," he screamed, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "You cannot do this." But we could. We were the embodiment of all the souls he had tormented, and they flowed through us, lending their strength to our cause. The light grew brighter, engulfing the room as Blake's form began to disintegrate under its power. "Mark," Laura called, her voice fierce and unwavering. "Now, we have to confront his core." I could see it, an orb of darkness pulsating at the center of Blake's being, the source of his power. "You will not control me any longer," I roared, stepping closer and reaching for the darkness. The moment my fingers touched the orb, pain shot through me, a searing agony that threatened to consume my spirit. But I pressed on, forcing my will against the malevolence. "You are nothing," I shouted. "You will not define my future." With one final surge of determination, I drew on every ounce of strength I had left, and with a deafening roar, I ripped the orb from Blake's core. "This ends now," I screamed, hurling it into the light. The explosion of energy was blinding. Blake's form twisted and writhed, his screams echoing through the chamber as the darkness dissipated. "You'll never be free," he howled, his voice fading into nothingness. "I will always be in your shadows." As the light consumed the remnants of his power, I felt an overwhelming sense of release wash over me. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Laura knelt beside me, her eyes bright with tears. "We did it, Mark. We did it." I looked up at her, a mixture of exhaustion and relief flooding my senses. "Is it really over?" She nodded, her expression fierce. "Yes, we faced him together, and he can't hurt anyone anymore." But even as we embraced, I could still hear his final words echoing in my mind. A warning, a reminder. Shadows would always linger, but they no longer held power over me. "Let's go home," I whispered, knowing that the road ahead would be long, but we would walk it together, free from the chains of the past.